baby. Good evening. Welcome to the May 10th meeting of the Amherst Comprehensive Plan and Zoning Project. First item on our agenda tonight is to accept the notes from the last meeting. Has everyone had an opportunity to review them, and are there any comments that would like to be made about the notes?
Seeing none, we will approve the notes as submitted, correct? Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to discuss the plan amendments material. Lee and Dan are going to take it from here. Where'd you go? Lee, are you there?
Yes.
Okay.
Starting?
Yep, I'll start. Just want to make sure you're hanging on there. So, good evening.
Yes.
Are you done? Good evening. So tonight is kind of the culmination of the last several months' work that you put in on defining the changes that will be recommended to the comprehensive plan. The material that you received last week should have included the proposed discussion of form and type as we've reviewed over the last several months, and then editorial changes to the comprehensive plan in Chapter 3 that would result from consideration and adoption or approval of the form and type discussions that we've had, particularly as they pertain to the commercial and mixed-use centers. So what you received were three components. The first was an introduction to the process that we followed along the way, and a little bit a discussion about how these things might be used. We're not going to discuss that tonight. That's introductory material that'll be incorporated into a report for task 6.1 that'll go to NYSERDA. We'll provide that in total to you prior to your next meeting, so you'll have a chance to look at that and hopefully endorse that to go to NYSERDA. The two pieces we are going to talk about tonight are the insert. It's entitled Insert for Section 3.3.2, the Commercial and Mixed-Use Center. We're going to talk about that first, because that really is the essence of what we've been working on over the last several months. And then we'll talk about the changes, specific changes to Chapter 3 that result from incorporation of these changes to the comprehensive plan. Of course there is. Are you there, Lee?
Yeah, you still sound fine, so you're okay.
Okay, we thought maybe we lost you. So, did you want to start off with some introduction on this, and we'll walk through this?
Yes. So I guess the first thing I want to say to you guys is just to remind you what the comprehensive plan really meaningfully gets used for, and that is in future zoning decisions, right? So not only in setting up the initial application of new zoning in these places, which will get full consideration as we go through the process, but more importantly, the next battle over, the gun club site, or the next battle over, whatever the next new site that people are thinking of adding to this system might be. Or the expansion of an existing area that we designate during this process. So the language in here that we are going to talk about tonight, and the framework for thinking about it, frames which zoning districts you're going to get in the end. Not only that, it sets some of the key metrics for those zoning districts. So you'll see that while in the early days of discussion of both form of development and type of development, we shied away from any real specificity, you'll see that for the first time, some metrics are being applied here in the plan. And those metrics will trickle down and be found again in the zone, so that in future, if someone has a huge site and claims they're only building a low-scale node, we'll know there's a mismatch, which we don't know under the current system. Under the current system, almost everybody gets the same zoning, no matter what kind of commercial or mixed-use activity center you were. You almost always got GB. So I want to remind you of that before we actually look at the text of this, to remind you of sort of the importance and how it's used. Does that make sense?
Yes.
We got a
Great.
north-south on that one.
Okay, one more time.
We got a north-south on that. Everybody's good with that.
Okay, good. So then the actual amendment, and hopefully you've got that in front of you there. It starts with 3.3.2 commercial and mixed-use activity centers. This replaces a chunk of the text in the existing plan. So it's an insert that's being split in place of the language that was there in the past. So this is 9/10 new language with some borrowing from the prior language that was there. And really what we're trying to do here is set up the same framework that led you through the exercise in the mapping that you worked on. And so what you'll see is a description of traditional form and then suburban form. The little sets of images there give you a bulleted version of the characteristics of the two different kinds of form and give you a couple of images. And then it moves on to type. And in type, I think this is the one where we have sort of added the most specificity. So I want to go through these perhaps in a little bit more detail. So you recall the types, I suspect, center, corridor, medium scale node, and low scale node. But now you're starting to see things like stories in height. So in center, 3 to 10 stories. In corridor, 2 to 5 stories. Medium scale, 2 to 4 stories. Low scale, 2 to 3 stories. So that is one of the metrics that would be applied in zoning. It doesn't mean that every center will be implemented with a 10-story allowance. We can have 3 implementing zoning districts, right? One that's at, that's at 5 stories, one that's at 8 stories, and one that's at 10 stories, perhaps. Whatever we choose for that sort of implementing model, there can be multiple flavors within the range, but they have to stay within the range. And then one of the other keys for centers is that the scale of the center itself. Now, in the previous version of the plan, the economic activity, economic character of the center was a driver. And we used words like neighborhood, community, and regional. And the challenge with some of that is that we were joking earlier, maybe the little ice cream shop in the old mill downtown is regional because she has a reputation that extends to Buffalo and people come from a long ways off. But in fact, given her scale, she's really almost neighborhood serving. She's walkable, mixed use for the nearby area. So we were struggling with using those sort of economic activity kinds of descriptors. But what we have done is borrowed some of the scale metrics from those. And so here you'll see in center, multi-tenant center up to 400,000 square feet, single-tenant buildings greater than 75,000 square feet. So just to give you a sense, that 75,000 square feet would be a good-sized grocery store, although around you it would actually be kind of a small Wegmans. The big Wegmans, I think, are 120 to 140,000 square feet. But those as a single-tenant kind of thing, or a center with a Wegmans in it, we clearly fit this center typology. When you shift to corridor, the same metric is centers of about 150,000 square feet and single tenants below 75,000 square feet. So this is more likely to be a traditional size grocery store, not a mega grocery store, and in a center then a grocery store anchor with a pharmacy and a few more inland line parcels. the medium scale node shrinks again, and here you're saying tenant spaces in the node. You could have a tenant space as big as 25,000 square feet, although many tenant spaces will be smaller. Medium scale nodes are still down at the neighborhood serving level for the most part. And low scale nodes shrinking all the way down so the footprints are more like 5,000 square feet. So just to remind you, something like a CVS pharmacy would likely be 12 and sometimes 14,000 square feet. So it would not fit in a low scale node, typically would be in a medium scale node. So that starts to give you some idea of how we're trying to frame in the metrics on some of these. And then we listed typical examples, trying to list some kind of sprinkled throughout the community for each of these. These are ones we've simply plopped off the map as we felt, good examples that fit the concept of center corridor, medium scale node, and low scale node. So this is really just putting the details into the work that you've already done. On the following pages, you'll see a visual description of those four, and then what we call Tim's map. This is proposed figure 6A, which would be a supplement to the existing figure 6. Now, the existing figure 6, and Dan will probably speak a little bit more about this when he talks about revisions to the full chapter. The existing figure 6 has to be revised, and what it will basically do is everything that's in one of these nodes becomes pretty much a single color, and then it points to this map. So that because it would be too many colors, especially at 8.5 by 11, but even at 11 by 17, it would have been really difficult to read all of these in the conceptual land use plan. And so by creating figure 6A, we get to just concentrate on our centers and their characterization as both suburban and traditional, and then as centers, corridors, medium scale, or low scale. So that's kind of the key map that will set the framework for thinking about rezoning. Hopefully we've successfully carried over the discussions that the group has had about those places. I do have a couple I want to talk to you about after we've gotten through the draft here. There are 4 specific locations I think that deserve one more look before we finish up that map. Finally, if you flip past the map to page 8, where there's a description of focusing on form and some sort of previewing of concepts that might show up in the zoning. So we're talking about the issue of managing building mass and what the tools might be for that, and then managing the transitions between one property and another, both in a shallow condition and in a deep condition, so that we can then flesh out in the zoning the actual regulations that respond to that. The final page on the back page is a really critical page. It's kind of what we've been talking about, and it says that you can consider expanding an existing center, but there's little, if any, reason to designate a new commercial or mixed-use center beyond the set here. That comes from the economic analysis that's been done. It comes from our sense that the community is actually already serving outside the community, serving people from well beyond the community with retail. And there isn't necessarily any reason to expand those pieces, but we should rather be concentrating them in the areas that we're designating in the future land use plan. So that's the little insert that goes into the existing piece. So that's the sort of totally new material replacing the old material and trying to do a better job of describing describing how these centers should grow in the future, what they should become, as they become the 8 different types that we have designated on Kim's map. So are there any questions, or is there any discussion about the text of that piece, about elements of that piece that might be missing, or material that you do not think should be included in the plan? We're open to hearing about any of that.
Anybody have comments?
Yes, I have a comment.
Lee, your definition of center indicates single-tenant buildings greater than 75,000 square feet. Should any accommodation be made for pad sites that are less than that size? A small fast
That's a
food.
really interesting question, and let me just make a note about that for tonight, but you raised a really good question.
Well, if you can, does everybody here know what a pad site is?
No.
Okay, so, one of you guys want to explain what that is? Just so everybody's aware of it.
My understanding is that it's a smaller retail location typically in a larger parking lot in a large retail center. That is often the location of say a fast food restaurant like a Taco Bell at Maple Ridge Center, for example.
We normally refer to those as out parcels.
Right.
Out parcels, pad sites,
Right.
same thing.
Yeah.
Lee, it's Dal. Just for the sake of consistency, on page 5 we talk about low-scale nodes, but when we go to page 6, it says small-scale node. Can we be consistent in the terminology there?
I mean, whatever way you want to go, it doesn't make any difference, but be consistent. I'm not tracking with you. This says small scale. Small scale and low scale, got it. Right. So that figure, Amy, got it.
Just to be consistent.
Sure,
Okay.
you guys know what it is, so.
Yep. Well, there are editorial changes which will not change the content of what we're doing, but there's some grammatical or some terms that have to be updated, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. What other comments on this?
Lee, this is Gary Palumbo. I'm just going to ask you to revisit it yet again, the discussion of height, and specifically the number of stories on for the types of development. When we talked the last 2 meetings, we had, I don't remember the center being as high as 10 stories. I thought we were going up as high as what the zoning allowed now. I don't remember it being higher. And in cascading down to corridor, medium, and small scale nodes, I know talked about it before. Tonight you mentioned that there could be subcategories in there. I'm not quite sure how the subcategories would work on the map, designations.
So let's talk about those separately. So don't let me forget your second question if we get caught up in the first one here. The key answer to the first one is, if we don't want to make the hotel at the interchange, I think it's a Marriott, non-conforming, we need 10 stories in one of these. Doesn't mean we ever use it for anything but designating existing stuff. And if that's the way we feel about it, we feel strongly about it, the actual text here in the plan amendment could say that that's the only reason we want to see 10 stories is to designate the existing setting.
Well,
So that's the first one.
if we have
Anybody
it,
want to talk about that a little bit?
if we have it that high, then we can expect proposals that high. Isn't it better to have one property or a couple of properties that are become non-conforming? We're not making it go away. And I don't know if I'm the only one on the committee that feels that way.
It's a challenge for refinancing of the existing building if we do that. And it's not an insurmountable challenge, but it does impact them. If we make sure that the non-conforming language in the code allows them to rebuild to the existing height and not just to the existing footprint, that would probably be okay. Yes, if you put a tool in the toolkit, somebody's going to ask for it. Again, that's why the plan exists, is to guide future zoning decisions. So if we're feeling as a committee pretty strongly about 10 stories only being used to accommodate existing development, we can say that in the plan amendment. And when the future applicant comes forward and says, I want 10 stories over here, then both planning staff, the neighborhood, anybody who is uncomfortable with that 10 stories being used can say, look, our plan said you were only supposed to do that, for existing buildings. It was not supposed to be used for new sites. What are you doing here?
Lee, Daniel Wachowski, I recognize Gary's concerns for the mention of 10 stories, and I could be mistaken, but I understand that area is currently in the shopping center district, which only allows for a maximum height of 65 feet, so, I don't see how we're going to be granting any nonconformity with that. It probably already is lawful nonconforming, so just wanted to make that known.
Lee, you had mentioned earlier that we can have different flavors of these in different places. Does that in part address this particular question?
Well, so the zoning itself, and let me take a different one than center in order to talk about this for a minute. So medium scale node says buildings are 2 to 4 stories. And I could imagine having 2 implementing districts, zoning districts, for that plan designation. One might allow up to 3 stories, and one might allow up to 4 stories. And they would be applied only at the time of zoning, right? When we do a zoning exercise, we would apply them. And the key difference would be when you're up against existing residential, you end up with the 3-story version. And, fundamentally, when there's more land around you, or you're up against other commercial activity or industrial activity, maybe then you can have the 4-story version. So there could be 2 implementing versions that fit within that range. They would be given all the same parameters, all the same uses, etc., except 1 more story of height. So now if we take that to the centers example, again, you might have a center did.
Uh-oh. He exited the meeting.
Okay. While we're trying to reconnect with him, let me ask the question to the committee. How many people are sensitive to the 10 stories and like to see it changed?
My only concern is if we only allow a maximum height of 65 feet, why are we mentioning something that can never be built?
Would make sense to me, but who else?
It's turned on.
Ed? No, I turned it off.
No, I guess I have a problem with creating a zoning district to accommodate what is now non-conforming. If indeed, from a planning point of view, all you want is a building which is 65 feet, it doesn't make much sense to have something taller than that. If indeed, that's not part of your plan, and you don't want to accommodate those elsewhere in the town, to me it does not make sense again to make that height limitation just to accommodate what's now non-conforming. I agree with Dan. The other thing is that I think Carl raised an issue. I don't think you had an answer. Did you, Carl?
About the other parcels? Yeah. Just how do you think about it?
That essentially is what he said, yeah.
And I guess while we're waiting, I'd have the same question for the committee about corridor. Is the reason why the corridor goes up to 5 stories is the same reasoning for the dense building as the center is for the hotel?
Good question.
I just don't remember us having 5 in the corridor.
Going back
Back to Carl's concerns in the center, I mean, it does indicate typical uses in centers include general retail, restaurants, offices, institutional uses. I don't see why it would exclude an out parcel for a restaurant or something that's smaller.
So that would go into 400.
Lee, are you there?
They only mention it because it says, single-tenant buildings greater than 75,000. How big are these exhibits? That's one of my questions. I think it was more than 4,000.
David, I can't hear you.
I'll wait for you to get on the phone.
Okay. If we get him back.
Are you there?
Sorry about that, guys.
Lee, try to push the right buttons, would you? Okay, Lee, you were in the middle of a dissertation on something. I can't remember what it was.
So, did I finish explaining what the possible options would be within one land use category?
Yeah, kind of you did. The question...
I mean, that's the basic idea, is that you might have a 2-story and a 3-story version in one district. In centers, you might have a 5-story and an 8-story version, for example. They would both implement a range of center types, and the only reason we would pick one over another is because of adjacency or context. And that decision would be made during zoning, not here in the plan.
Are we comfortable with that? David, you have a comment?
I didn't hear you, David.
I'm fine with that.
I guess I have a bit of a problem with that. If indeed, the principle behind this needs to be articulated in the plan, so we know when to use this and when not to use it. It would seem to me that we need to be more definitive in plan language here, and then that definitive language needs to be carried over into the zoning. I'm not terribly comfortable with this. And I may hate hearing myself say this. I'm not really comfortable with the kind of flexibility that I'm hearing right now. I prefer a little more specificity.
So let me extend that conversation then, because if we're going to have some paralysis on 3 to 10 stories, is the context of 400,000 square feet and 75,000 square feet to be interpreted just as literally or just as flexible? I mean, I don't even know where those numbers come from, 400,000 square feet and 75,000 square feet, but if 3 to 10 stories is supposed to be literal, what is 400,000 square feet and 75,000 square feet for single tenants? I don't understand how to interpret that either. So, Lee, can you help us understand what the genesis is of the 400,000 square feet for a multi-tenant center and 75,000 square feet for a single-tenant building? And I think of, like, if the Boulevard Mall ever went away and got rebuilt, 400,000 square feet's small. So I'm just not really sure how to interpret, if it's meant there to suggest just descriptively or illustratively that this center is for big projects that could be as big as 400 or 500, 600 square feet, but the specifics are going to be identified in each center, that I'm okay with it. But my concern is that this stuff gets read literally when it's put in practice, and then you've got arguments taking place over projects because somebody wants to interpret this as a literal description versus somebody's just trying to differentiate one node from another.
So the metrics are intended to travel on down and find their way into the zoning. Now, whether we need those metrics for each of the scales, you could simply say for the center that they're larger than whatever the number is we put in the previous one, right, and only regulate the 3 lower ones. But we do intend to put what would be used as tenant footprint, right, in the zoning, so the size of the floor plate for a single tenant, and then potentially the size of the center as a whole in those to maintain the character of them in these various flavor areas. You cannot be a low-scale node with 100,000 square foot building. It's just not possible.
Yeah. It would seem to be that if you're going to include metrics in the comprehensive plan language, you're going to have to carry those metrics forward to the zoning. Maybe what the better solution here is to have more of a descriptive there without the metrics in it. And then when we get to the zoning portion of this project, then deal with those at that point in time, but then follow the verbal guidance, the general guidance provided in the plan. But as soon as you put those numbers in the plan, then I think you're bound by them, and I have a little concern about doing it at this point.
Well, so, this is tough, Rick, because it seems to me that you just asked for a single implementing district for each flavor, which is certainly possible, but at the same time, that single implementing district only gets its metric when it shows up as zoning. And that's fine. It's not that it can't be done, it's that people really know at the time of looking at the plan what these centers are like. Because we won't have, you know, the fundamental metrics with them. And traditionally, I have been a believer that there needs to be multiple implementing zoning districts to the extent possible for plan categories. There's supposed to be some flexibility for differentiation across the community, for developer choice, for different products, and so I was certainly hoping to put two at least zoning categories as possible implementing districts for each of the kinds of places. The difference between them would be their height, principally. They would have the same transitional rules, they would have the same building footprint rules, etc. So the key difference would be height, and those height discussions would be decided in mapping them as zoning, and certainly in requests in the future. So I'm not certain how you and the committee might feel about that.
It would seem to be, if that's going to be the strategy in moving from comprehensive plan to zoning, that you're going to have to be very specific in the plan that that's what your intention is, and to outline that or to describe that fairly succinctly in the comprehensive plan. When I read what we have in front of us now, I don't see that. Maybe I need to go back and take another look.
No, you're right. It's not expressly said here, and yes, it would be done at the time of zoning. Now, I mean, we could go ahead and expressly say, you know, this center type is, you know, implemented by, you know, two separate districts, an 8-story district and a 5-story district. The 8-story district should be used in this kind of places. The 5-story district should be used in that kind of place. So we can certainly provide that additional guidance.
I guess for the committee, my last statement on this is wrapped up in that if we create the plan narrative describing these types of uses, districts, in the plan now, and it carries down to the zoning now as part of this project, that's one thing. My concern more is what happens next year or the year after. Once it's in there with, even in the plan or in the zoning, once it's there, then are we willing to hear applications a year or 2 or 3 years down the line for a 10-story hotel or a 10-story office building? We have to be ready for that, because I think if we put it in here, even though we're assigning it to geography now in the zoning, it doesn't mean someone's not going to ask for that later, and are we ready to accept that or hear that? And we also don't know what future town boards are going to be like.
Well, I was just going to say, and I've been listening to all this, my bigger concern, and I understand what both of you guys are talking about, I understand what Leah's saying too. The reality of the situation is that I think proposing this to the town board, we're going to have a very difficult time accepting something 10 stories. I don't think it's going to fly. So if we want to just admit the reality of the situation as it exists today, probably even specifying 10 stories is a reach to get approval. To say that existing is grandfathered is fine. Pardon me?
Non-conforming, grandfather.
Grandfather, non-conforming, whichever way. I happen to be old, Bill, so I still use old terms. Legally, okay. Non-conforming, then that's fine. But in the meantime, if someone wanted to build over five stories, they're gonna have to go before the zoning board of appeals, they're gonna have to make a case, it's gotta be a legitimate case, and it's gonna be the exception to the rule, and the town board's gonna have to approve it. It's not gonna be, I don't think, accepted as part of the code, everyday code. You guys agree, you developers, do you agree?
Well, from a developer standpoint, I would just say, keep in mind if, by limiting the number of stories in the center definition, to something less than 10, you're also limiting its economic development potential to a potential investor. So, let's take the Boulevard Mall, for example. If there was if that goes bankrupt and out-of-town developer comes in and wants to redevelop it into a mixed-use town center with residential, office, retail, a real, sense of place, good vibrancy. By only allowing 6 levels, you're limiting the amount of density and its economic viability to that potential developer, and thereby you're also limiting the amount of taxes that it can generate for the town. Something to keep in mind.
But let me ask you a question. If that were the case, and it's applicable into a large parcel like Boulevard Mall sits on, wouldn't the developer at that point go to the zoning board of appeals and file for an appeal? And wouldn't it be more likely that since it is a large parcel, not surrounded by residences, that it would, and I'm speculating, I realize that, but wouldn't it probably be approved by the zoning board of appeals and probably by the town board?
Well, I guess maybe I'm misunderstanding something, so that's my question. Say, just because it says 3 to 10 stories here, doesn't mean that 10 stories is permitted anywhere. So they may still have to go to so if it says 10 stories here, but on the Boulevard Mall site, that is within the zoning, limited to 8 stories, or 7 stories, or 6 stories, they still have to go to the ZBA. I guess what I'm saying is, what I was interpreting this section to mean is it's not really granting permission to do anything, it's just trying to describe the different nodes, but the specifics apply to the particular district that somebody's looking at. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's how I'm...
Because I have the same question. As you tell me that if I come back and I want to do a 500,000 square foot multi-tenant building instead of 400,000 square feet, is that the same effect as a 10-story building versus an 8-story building? I guess I just don't know where this is meant to be conceptual and where it's meant to be literal. And I think my understanding is we're talking about something that's one step removed from the literal.
And I concur with what David said. I think we have to be more general and less specific in these descriptions. I mean, why can't we simply say buildings may be taller than what we find in the corridor?
I don't know if you have to...
I mean, he doesn't have to...
I don't know if you have to have numbers at all.
Right.
Unless Lee says we have to have numbers. If I'm just trying to describe the difference between these 4 nodes, I can say that the centers where the tallest buildings will be and where the largest single buildings will be, and then say, and you can almost do it narratively without necessarily applying numbers, that then you run the risk of somebody trying to interpret to be more literal than what's actually contained in the districts. But I'm not a zoning expert, so Lee may say that's not the right thing to do.
My only caution about that model, and you're right, this plan can be written that way. My only caution about that model is it is just as much dice rolling, if not more, because if we end up with language similar to that, this sort of softer language about these, we will battle over each application of zoning. Not only that, but the town board could potentially create a no zoning district that we never expected, like 16 stories, and go ahead and apply that. Now, that's still possible, but what we've set up right this minute is what I've described to Rick and others as sort of a 2-step. The second 2-step. But the 2-step is change the plan first and then change the zoning, right? So if you wanted to turn a medium-scale node into a center and get the taller height from the center zoning district, you would actually have to go through a significant effort to change the plan first at the conceptual level, no drawings, no nothing, just saying my land is appropriate to be a center and have these additional intensities and heights. And we can shut you down at that point without talking about a specific project. And that, to me, is the value of putting some, perhaps not as many as we have, perhaps softer metrics, but putting some metrics in here that frame these particular categories. We can go so far, and some plans do, as with the implementing zoning district for given height. Center only gets this or this, you know, and by doing that, by making those linkages and having these kinds of metrics here in the plan, we keep the town board from doing anything really scary in the future without a lot of activity, a lot of public discussion, et cetera. It's not that it's impossible, it's just that it takes a little more energy to amend both the plan and the zoning. Does that make sense?
Lee, I still have an issue. I mean, if the text itself is going to put the thresholds at their maximum, it's going to list the maximum height within each zoning district that's created for each form and district or type. I mean, this should just be a general description of what the vision is asking for a center or a corridor. And you know, I still concur with David. I don't think we have to be that specific. I think you're going to be specific in the code statute itself, and that's going to set the threshold for height and bulk and the other parameters. But you know, that's my opinion.
I just want to point out that these thresholds exist in the plan today. So, absolutely. So if you go in there and you look at the different types of centers, there's regional, neighborhood, community centers, and there's metrics for each one of those. And they're meant to guide the planning department, the planning board, the town board, given a range of what we're looking for here. Some level of magnitude of the development. It's not hard and fast, but it's supposed to be giving people some sense of what actually is intended to be there. So it's there now. The 400,000 number comes from the description of the regional center in the comprehensive plan now.
I think that, you know, my colleague describes the way the plan is currently structured, but what happened there is, I mean, there was never that leap of faith that took place after the comprehensive plan was adopted, whereby we then said, okay, here are the parameters that were defined in the plan. We're going to move forward and create districts which implement the metrics that are shown in the plan. We're going to do that here. So I think it's critically important that we essentially provide from my point of view, a narrative which describes what that district should look like and what the development in that district should look like. My preference would be to have more of a descriptive and fewer metrics. If we're going to have metrics, we need to be able to make sure that they are absolutely accurate, because we know we're going to have to live by those as we move forward to the zoning.
So let me ask the question. Existing today, you're talking about footprint, you're talking about square footage. Does it address height besides 65 feet?
Does not address height. It basically addresses the square footage and the type scales.
And from what I hear, and even when we have planning board sessions, I hear more comment, not so much about footprint and about square footage, as I do about height. We get a lot more pushback on height than I think you get at ZBA too. So I would be more concerned with Gary's first question, when we go all the ways back again to 10 stories, than I would about footprint. I don't know if the rest of the committee feels that way, but I think that's the bigger issue right now.
To me, the issue seems to be more about how we describe these districts in the comprehensive plan, and how that then provides guidance to what we're going to be doing in the future in terms of the development of zoning that implements those districts. Whether or not we take time to get metrics that guide that process, or whether or not we provide those general descriptions that guide that process. To me, I think the general description is a preferable approach.
Dan, what do you need tonight?
More flexibility in the future. But with that flexibility comes some attendant risk. Yes, we're going to get the map right. We hope this first time when we read some of these places with the new zoning. The reason for the plan becomes then not just that first round, but the next round. The expansion of a node, the conversion of a node into a different type of node, those kinds of things that would require a map change.
Still there?
What do you need tonight to stay on schedule? Are we blessing this? It's obviously not final, but you need down to the numbers or conceptually?
Yeah, essentially what you're going to ask to do tonight is to release this for public.
I think we use contradicting stuff, and you said the last page was the most important part. I mean, if we look at expansion of existing centers, the town's commercial and mixed-use centers are generally well-established. Many of the residential neighborhoods have developed around these areas. Expansions and encroachments into neighborhoods or extensions of commercial land use along commercial portions occur rarely, if at all.
Zach?
So, I mean, the worry that this is going to grow out of control in the future, I think it's unfounded.
Well, but that's why we're all here to begin with, though. That's why there's a planning board, that's why there's a planning department, to intercede if it does get out of hand, and I'm sure that it doesn't, I think. I don't know. So, where do we stand? What do we want Lee to do?
Lee, are you back?
Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, I'm back.
You pushed the wrong button again.
It's my screensaver kicking me off.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Dan, do you have a question? Is there a question here? I don't remember, I'm sorry.
When we lost you, Daniel Wachowski, I guess I'm in disagreement that we should be overly concerned about the time that may come when people want to expand a small node or a medium node. We were directed to the last page of the document to be the most important, and it does caution us that there may be expansion, but it also gives you the suggestion that these areas are well established, and we should not necessarily expand them without caution. So I agree with Rick as well. I think let's describe these areas generically as best we can in the comp plan, and then more definitively in the statute, in the zoning law.
We've kind of beat this to death at this point. We're never going to get through the rest of what we have to get through. Good discussion, though. So, how do we feel about keeping more generic? Everybody in favor of keeping it more generic, put up your hand. Let's put it that way.
What do you mean by more generic?
Dan, explain what you mean by more generic.
But not numbers.
Yeah, relative without numbers. As David
So
had
keep the
suggested.
height, it's stories.
Not necessarily stories. I like David's suggestion that, the center is where we have the largest,
Footprint, the
bulkiest
tallest building.
structures as compared to our...
So it'll be less numeric and more narrative.
So the consensus of the board, Lee, is to be more generic.
More descriptive.
Understood. So the other question, which is a companion to that, is there more than one implementing district within these categories?
Well,
There's too many to begin with.
yeah, it's broad enough I think the consensus is it's broad enough the way it is.
Okay?
All right. It's fine the way it exists. We don't need to have more within.
I don't know if I necessarily want to aggregate it down even more when we get to the zoning text. Just aggregate. Split it into more pieces, more granular. Right. More granular.
That's a term he's not familiar with. So instead of having a quart of beer,
We've got some
it's only a
ideas
pint.
about that we can spring on you at the time of the zoning. So we can leave that question, but the the temptation is principally one implementing district for each flavor on the map.
It would seem to be, I'm sorry, Ellen, you were trying to...
Well, I feel kind of out of my depth with this, but am I correct in understanding if someone wanted to build a 10-story building next to an existing 10-story building, let's say, I don't know, Dent 2 or Marriott 2 or something like that, would anything that we're talking about here prevent that? In other words, if a tall building is already there, I think there's a general agreement we don't want a lot of tall buildings all over the town, but if one is in these center areas, is what we're discussing here whether that would be permissible, or do I have the question wrong?
Did you hear the question, Lee?
Okay, well, yes, I heard the question. So, the districts could be drafted one of two ways. They could be absolutely prescriptive, in which case an 8-story district would never allow a 10-story building, or they could have some town board level flexibility on the issue of height. The more you use that tool, the less certain we are about what we're going to achieve in each of these locations. So that is a little bit like leaving the 10 stories, you know. So having a 10-story district, yes, it could be misused in the future. Having an 8-story district with the ability for town board to approve 2 more stories, just as risky in the future, in my mind. However, I'm more than willing, because it is Amherst's current model to do that, I'm more than willing to build a district that way if that is really the consensus on how they should operate.
Comments? Lee, if you could visualize what's going on at this point. I see a lot of question marks on a lot of faces, including mine, by the way.
This is not a question which needs to be answered tonight, but is an important question for framing the next round. So we will have to find some time to talk about it in the near future in order to be able to create the framework for the zoning and then eventually the zoning itself.
All right, then I move, unless somebody objects, that we leave it for the next discussion. Anybody object to that?
That's fine. Yeah, I don't think I've heard anybody here tonight say, even the developers in the room, that we're looking for some gray area for the opportunity to, you know, find some backdoor way to kind of get an extra 10-story building in an area where there's an existing one. That's not the intent here. I think we're really just, at least my comments were limited to, okay, I'm trying to understand this first section of 3.3.2, which is trying to differentiate narratively the difference between, for the layman reading this and the person reading, what's the difference between these different nodes? What do they mean? What's the gradation of them? And then knowing that when we get to the implementing districts, depending on where those districts are going to get much more specific. And the task will get tougher in the room because we'll be getting very specific about things. And, whenever you get specific, you have more opinions in the room than you probably want to have. But that's just the way things work out.
Yeah, I didn't hear anybody say that they wanted to build a 10-story building. Okay.
I have one comment, Al. So you're right after I make it. I've heard Lee say on a number of occasions that there would be more than one flavor of zoning for each one, for some of the types. I think that needs to be described in some detail in the plan language itself. If that's going to be the way we approach the zoning, then that should be described in a way that's comprehensible in the comprehensive plan as well.
Lee, you heard that?
Yes, I did, Dal, but my sense was we kind of nixed that really fundamentally there should not be multiple implementing zones. There should be a almost one-to-one translation between the characterization of one place to one implementing zoning district.
I think that was the impression that I got also.
I would certainly be more comfortable with that. I was responding to what Lee had said previously.
Okay. What's next, Lee?
There are actually 4 places that you guys skipped slightly over that I need to touch on. And so I hope at the same time Kim is playing around with an image for you so that you can visualize these places. The first one is a little shopping center at the south end of Cross Point. And the land that exists kind of near it, along whatever that road is, along the south edge of the Cross Point property. So you guys had, I believe, pulled that out of the series, and it's my impression we need to put it back in at minimum for that center, if not for that center and around to what I think is a little restaurant kind of around the corner from it there. And my suggestion would be that we call that suburban form because of the big street and the character of Cross Point itself, and that we call it a medium scale node. It is not really a corridor since it goes up within the development, and it seems as though it's about the right size for a medium scale node. If you guys are comfortable with that, and Dal, I'll ask you to try to confirm that for me long distance, that's how we would designate that one, and we would add it to Kim's map.
I'm not sure which one you're referring to myself. I don't know if everybody else is. Are you referring to just Shop Patrick's location by itself?
Everybody know where we're at?
Kim, what number is it?
Number 67.
Thank you.
It's at the corner of Millersport and North French. Sean Patrick's is here, Amherst Pizza and Ale House is here.
Yeah.
Part of the,
And there's a used car lot in the other corner across Western used car.
This does extend across the street.
And we took it out completely?
Suggesting it probably needs to be rethought. Right now it's a suburban center, right? So Lee, you wanted to make that a medium scale node, that suburban medium scale node, primarily because of the uses like Sean Patrick's and the one across the street. Is that what you're suggesting? Still there?
In the email that we sent out, that was what the suggestion was.
Yeah.
That's right, it's not a virtual gate, there's no change. It's currently some
It makes sense to be a note.
Yeah, we currently have it in as a corridor, right? If you made that a medium-scale node, there aren't single-family homes around it. I mean, that's basically all commercial all through there. You have to get down the road on North French going east quite a bit before you run into anything that's residential. If you went west, you gotta go all the way down to the 990 before anything comes in. I don't understand why should it be a medium-scale node. Corridor is fine. Unless you guys disagree.
Let's see if I can get them back in.
The screensaver took them up again.
Are you back
I
on?
agree this time.
All right.
Yep.
Does anybody agree?
It's currently listed as a corridor, is it not, Lee?
Are we sure we're talking about the same property?
You'll have to
Well,
ask Kim to help you with that.
Actually, it looks like it's done.
It's kind of, well, look, bring your map back up. Bring your map up. See the colors here.
It's hard to tell on this guy.
Same as this.
So, this is, I believe this is four.
Yeah.
Or is that center? Is that center?
Mhm.
So right now it's the center, suburban center.
It's currently a suburban center.
that Cross Point Flat,
Remove it,
Yeah.
Dan.
Yeah, but it's on the Millersport side, at the intersection of North French and Millersport that he's talking about.
so it's not Sean Ave, 67.
Well,
It extends up to
it
Sean
extends
Ave.
up to there.
Same designation extends up the street.
Why would we ever made that center? I think that's what he's asking. Yeah, that doesn't belong as a center, does it, guys?
No, it makes sense.
Or even corridor makes sense, either one, but not a center.
Lee, are you still there?
I am, yes. I'd be comfortable with either corridor or medium scale node.
All right, how many in favor of corridor? How many in favor of medium scale node? Medium scale node it is, Lee.
Great, thank you for that. The second one is the infamous TND area, the no Walmart site, on the northern portion of Millersport. And here, I think we have an obligation, because of the way that the TND reads, to allocate it some commercial mixed use, but I believe that it should surround the intersection of Millersport, Smith, and New Road. The three come together there. Hopefully you guys are getting a chance to look at that site. There is absolutely nothing there today, and one day perhaps there will be. But at the intersection of those three, in my mind, is the location that a commercial developer would use, unless someone knows something in particular about this site that somehow would make us feel different. And so I would suggest that we use that spot there, really right at the intersection of New and Millersport, where Amherst Baby and Child Care Center is, as kind of the cornerstone of the entrance to a mixed-use piece that would be right here. I think because it's along Millersport, it's suburban form, but I think, again, because it's supposed to be a PND, meaning it's really only serving its own residents, I have suggested it be a low-scale node. I think you could go to medium-scale nodes, but probably no further up the scale, and it certainly should not be treated as a corridor, because this was supposed to be traditional neighborhood development in which the commercial activity is nodal.
Well, as a matter of fact, just before the planning board last week, or 2 weeks ago, or whatever, we approved a new development on New Road itself, at least the beginning of it. So, a recommendation to rezone it, which you'll be getting shortly, Gary. So I guess there's some merit to what you're saying, because that area is going to continue to expand. Anybody have any particular thoughts on what they'd like to do with that?
I think this is a bit of an anomaly because it's TND. I mean, there's a required component, a commercial component in TND. The site itself is not zoned commercially, but I think this is a bit of an anomaly. I'd like to see some sort of accommodation made here that doesn't put that clear commercial designation on it. I'm not sure exactly how to do that, but this needs to have some sort of special consideration. And I'm a little concerned about how you do that within the context of a comprehensive plan. That being said, I have no solution here, but I think that's a very unique problem in the town.
We do have several other nodes that will get their own descriptor in the plan, and as an example, the hospital area is one. So it can be packaged in with those if we feel strongly that this is a particular anomaly and should be described in the plan and then let be what it was proposed to be.
I would certainly be interested in what the rest of the committee thinks about this, but from my perspective, it is an anomaly, and it needs to have special consideration. And again, for the second time, I would be hesitant to designate it as in some commercial category in the plan, clear commercial category in the plan. There was the history behind this is rather jaded. That this was put in here for a particular reason. But it should not be designated as commercial.
It serves as a community facility. You have the NARC there, you got the American Legion there, you've got an obnoxious use that has offensive odor behind it.
Any other thoughts?
The TND pieces, as I recall, is here. And these are zone PDs right now. We talked a little bit about this. One of the things that we did do,
So the current comprehensive plan has a description of some of these areas, like, as Lee is alluding to, which essentially describes what the desired scale at the time, in the current plan, what the desired scale of commercial activity might be there. I don't know whether an option here would be to not locate a specific place where the commercial activity would take place, but simply characterize the type and form that might go there.
Comments? Thoughts? Carl?
Rick, I'm just curious, why you would be concerned about designating this as a low-scale node for limited amount of commercial activity like convenience stores and things like that, for example?
First of all, my concern is that our charge here was to take a look at the commercially zoned areas. That area, that parcel is not zoned commercial, but it's zoned in a category that has a commercial component to it. Where that might exist, the scale of that, the size of it, what it's going to look like is limited. It's prescribed by the zoning code right now. But I need to just be very careful of how this is handled. That's why I'm advocating for this one to be called out in a very special way. And I think it should acknowledge the fact that it is a TND and not a clear commercial district.
Isn't that the argument we used to take it out last time?
Well, that's the argument with staff discussions and previous discussions with Lee, I think that's the argument I've been using all along. And that's my perspective. I would certainly like to know what the rest of the committee seems to think about this.
Rick, I respect your concerns. I think I've always had an issue with the original charge, that we have to look at just commercial districts. I mean, if you look at how the zoning law is set out, or the zoning code set out, it's defined as non-residential districts, special purpose and overlay district, and there's no real, this is commercial, we do have residential district, but there's really nothing that ever says a commercial district. If you look at the various parts, we have non-residential districts, which include OB, neighborhood business, GB, CS, MS. One could argue that the charge should include everything in Part 4.
TNDs and special districts.
I guess I'd ask for some clarification. What you're saying, because it's not included in that, I'll call it the component of the zoning code, that therefore it should not be a commercial district?
I guess my initial reservations were limited to just commercial districts, but there's nothing in the statute that says these are commercial districts.
Or that's the TND is a commercial district.
The TND is not. I would agree with you in that respect, because the TND is a special purpose and overlay district, whereas there's some districts we're not even including. Office business district, we're not looking at any of those.
No.
And those are non-residential residential districts. They're not residential districts.
If you just look at those gross types of land uses, you're not going to see it there. And if you use that to base your decision on it, you'd come to this conclusion you've come to, and the one that I've come to. But if you drill down into the code and you take a look at the specific regulations in the TND, it actually calls for a percentage of the site to be, or for some of the site to be used for commercial use.
And that would be rationale for addressing a rezone portion of the site in the future.
So, Rick, the only challenge here is that the existing Figure 6, today's Figure 6, did designate the whole TNB site as mixed use. So if we're going to shift back from that, we just have to find a place to put it. And that place, in the approach we're headed for right now, under the new map, that would end up as a special use center with a very particular description of the TND in the plan.
You have a number of areas that are shown in 6A that are going to have to be handled in the same way.
But they're existing, right?
Yep, right now we have two, and yes, I could see those expanding over time.
Well, okay. So I guess the question is, where do we go with this from here?
I'm not quite sure what the question really is, okay? But, you know, do we leave it as we originally designated, or do we change it? That's the question, the first question. Leave it as it is or change it? How many in favor of leaving it as it is?
Well, hang on a second. So let's think about what that means. Leaving it as it is.
We took it out, did we
Right
not?
now. Okay, right now, on figure 6, okay, in fact, this thing that looks like this, okay, right now, that's designated as mixed use.
Right.
Right now.
Yep.
What is designated as.
Yep.
The question is, what do we designate?
With the star.
Right, with a star, and there's a description of that area in the comprehensive plan, which endeavors to describe it a little bit and put a scale to the commercial activity that would be there using the old typology, which is neighborhood, community, regional center. Okay, so that's what's there now.
Well, that's not really what I was asking, though.
But, well, I guess
Did we take it out last time?
I think you punted last time.
No, we took it out.
Okay, well, then the question becomes, what do we do with it?
Well, that's what I'm asking. Do you want to leave it that we took it out, or do you want to consider it?
And I would argue that you can't leave it out.
Well, okay, and we heard that, and I think we heard the same from Rick, too, essentially that he would like some designation to it, and the committee originally said we took it out. Do we want to leave it out, or do we want to consider it?
You can't leave it out, you have to designate it something.
Now, what's the net effect to the current property owner if you leave it out?
There's no designation.
So what do I do? Am I going to come to you and seek an assessment reduction because you've basically completely removed this consideration for commercial development? I don't know what...
There's two choices here. If you act on it, there are two choices. One is something which parallels Rick's description, which is, we call it a special use center, which we're doing for a couple of other places. We describe it in particular in the plan as a one-of-a-kind thing, and we leave it that way. That's one option. The alternate, which is the one that I had originally offered up that makes Rick a bit uncomfortable here, is the notion of designating a portion of it for the commercial activity, and then designating the remainder of it something like mixed residential, in order to take it off of map 6 and move it to map 6A, where we can put that level of detail. So it's one of those two options in my mind: special district or the specific designation of some portion of the site for commercial activity and the remainder for residential.
I have a question. If it's necessary to put that back in or describe it in some fashion, why aren't we doing that to the other gray areas that we
We're going to get there. Maybe.
All right, Lee has suggested two alternatives. Yes, ma'am.
If we went with the second one, how would portion be defined? That seems a little vague to me.
Good question.
Well, the map is very generalized, so the blob would not be parcel specific, and the characterization would drive things more than anything else. But there would be, in my mind, a spot of pink right at the intersection of New and Millersport.
And Lee, if it helps, there was a former map we had that actually did delimit a commercial extent to that area. My recollection is that's probably what caused the committee to say we don't want to define the geographic extent of that area. At the time we had that discussion. So that's essentially what you're saying. We would define an area in that parcel where the commercial activity would take place. That's option 2 that you just described?
Yes.
Okay. before we beat this dead horse to death. Special use designation, how many are in favor of that? Well, option one is special use designation. Option number two is to define portions of it.
I still need an explanation as to why we can't simply remove it as originally intended. What was the original rationale for creating it a commercial center or a special center to begin with? Why, you can go backwards and say, you made a mistake, or it didn't meet our intent. This is a comprehensive plan, this is a vision.
My tall friend says we can't do that.
So let me ask you, so what's the vision for it?
You have to tell me what was your vision for it originally and why you thought this geographic area deserves special interest or special consideration.
It's zoned traditional neighborhood development. It's been zoned that way for several years. This area right here.
The other gray areas that were removed.
Yeah.
What are those zones?
We're gonna get to those, Dan. But we're hoping to have that conversation about these other ones tonight as we go along. This one is zoned traditional neighborhood development, it has been for years. It was formerly shopping center.
And that was the Walmart site.
The town board, I think the town board changed it to TND in part because there was a proposal being floated around to put a Walmart on the site. And I think the scale of that commercial development was considered to be inappropriate for that place, and it certainly didn't, it began to suggest that maybe there's a much more intensive commercial use that could take place there, which I don't think the town board wanted to see. So right now in the comprehensive plan, it's zoned as a mixed-use activity center, or not zoned, it's designated as a mixed-use activity center, which implies some commercial element to it in the TND. So the question really is, what do you want to do with it? This whole area is pink right now with a star on it. This is dealing with commercial and mixed-use centers. So when we punted on this before, kind of left it hanging out there, and I think what we're trying to do now is address this, because otherwise, I'm not sure how we designate this on the comprehensive plan.
I don't have any objection to going to a low-scale node. If you're telling me I can restrict it and reduce its geography.
That was option two.
So if I can reduce the geography of what was originally intended, I don't have a problem with that.
I think you've got the code in front of you. I'm not sure what it is, but I believe there is a percentage of the TND that's allowed in commercial use.
But
So there.
That's a concept. That's a conceptual geographic area. Can I not designate that as a low commercial or low node?
Yeah, I think that's.
Smaller area?
I think that's option one, right? I think that's option one. We characterize this area and we identify a form and type for it, right?
For a portion of it.
What the commercial portion of it, correct? Whatever that might be, because I'm getting the sense that some people, Rick, I don't want to speak for you, but defining a specific geographic area is not necessarily what we might want to do here. We want to leave that flexibility open.
And that's what we had in one of the earlier maps
It is.
last month.
Well, yes. So, Lee, if I get this correctly, we had option one, which essentially was to characterize the area. I'm going to go so far as to suggest that there would be a form and type described for this. It would be a center that would be described in the plan, such as, or similar to what we have for Millard Fillmore Hospital and some of the other special use areas. Or it's specifically define the geographic extent of the commercial activity there, and probably still have the same kind of description to it. That's the difference I see. So we're talking define geography or not.
So let's say that we acquiesce and we put it in the special district. I think the only question then is that I had suggested suburban form, anticipating the commercial up against Millersport. If we believe the commercial will be perpendicular to Millersport and more internal to the site, as it would typically be in TND, then whoever was asked questions a minute ago is right. It should be traditional, and it could certainly be low-scale node as the suggestion. because that's all that that neighborhood, that immediate neighborhood, would certainly be able to support.
I don't know if we can answer that question tonight.
What disturbs me more than anything else right now, fellas, this is my, ladies too, it's just my personal opinion. We had this discussion ad nauseum at the last meeting, and we decided as a committee that we did not want to consider it, period. You guys are bringing this up now and forcing us to make a decision. I don't think that's right. We made a decision at the last meeting. We said our piece. Why do we want to change it now?
Because we're not sure.
Because I have to put a color on the map.
Yeah.
I need to put a color on the map. Now, if you're fine with staff and I putting the color on the map for others to consider, that's fine.
Why can't we leave it as it is, T and D?
We can. So we designated a special district and describe what T and D means in general terms in the plan, and that would be all that would be said about this piece.
Then that's fine. Then let it be.
That's option one. Right? Okay, vote.
How many people are in favor of...
I'll vote for that one.
It's unanimous, that's what we want to do.
Got it. So the next one is,
I can hardly wait.
Piece of, UV along Miller Court. This is a, fairly significant site. It's right there at the Webster entrance to UV. We don't really get to control development here. It's on UV's land. They trump us. So, do we want to signal to future developers what we envision the future land use is, even though we don't get necessarily full regulatory control of the site? Or do we, as you have on several other places, do we leave some kind of special designation and treat this one separately? If we designate it, I would suggest it would be suburban form and that it be a low-scale code, and that be showed right at the intersection where the entrance to the university is. This would assume that in spite of the fact it's always been envisioned as a commercial site, really the most likely outcome on this site is multifamily residential associated with the university, and that this would be a node serving that multifamily right at the entrance across from UV's Webster end.
Discussion?
I believe we talked about this one at the last two meetings as well, and as a group, we felt comfortable not having it with any of the new commercial designations, which is why we took it out.
Right, but he's saying that he knows, he's acknowledging the fact we don't have jurisdiction, but he still wants us to make a decision.
Well, if it's more likely that it's going to go residential than commercial, then for this project, which is just talking about commercial, to keep it out.
Where does the speculation come from that it's most likely to be multifamily related to the university?
Lee, did you catch that question?
That's my personal speculation. I think it would be supported by the economist, only in that there is substantial commercial property already available in the community, much of it actually adjacent to UV, and that this is not the right place for that kind of activity. I mean, is this the Walmart site? I don't think so. So if we were getting a chance, instead of the entity that we have sitting underneath there, we're getting a chance to rethink this area, we'd be putting as much housing near the university as we could. That's not something that's going to happen anytime soon. UV's not doing anything with this property. It would be just as easy to give this one a special designation and describe the conditions and the circumstances and simply move forward.
This property in the UV 2020 plan is essentially shown as a university village, which would be a combination of residential uses and the larger office uses. There was no indication in that plan that there would be any commercial use whatsoever on this property. I would advocate for moving forward with its it's going to be a mixed-use project, it's not going to be a commercial mixed-use project. I think we just need to move forward with what we have in the plan now with as a description of what's going to be there.
Call it a special use center?
Yeah.
With a description? So a special use center with a description.
Yeah, but the other thing is that and I think with this, as we had this discussion here, is that a mixed center doesn't necessarily mean it has to have a commercial component to it. A mixed use can be mixed residential uses, all residential, with a mix of those, and that would be a mixed use center. Or it could have an office component to it,
Good.
along with residential. So maybe we're wrapping ourselves around the axle here by assuming that because it's called mixed use, it has to have commercial associated with it.
All right. How many people are in favor of making a special district out of this, too?
Not one of,
Pardon me?
not one of our commercial districts.
Right. Yeah, okay. Lee, special district.
Thank you.
Next.
One last one for you, and that's Muir Woods. I believe, Dan, did you want to describe some of the recent activity there?
No. No, thank you. I'm not sure I'm going to get it right, so I'm going to look at Tim and Rick to help me out here. But right now, we believe this area here will be a single-family residential subdivision. That's what we're hearing, I think. So, again, this has been designated as a special use activity center in the previous plan. So the question is whether we keep it that way or we designate it differently. There's a piece, and the wetlands here are significant. There's an area in here, the other pink area, and this had been proposed for higher density residential, if I'm not mistaken, right? This general area here, the next pink area to the west, right in here. I'm trying to get a.
It's residential and possibly flex station.
So possibly some flex space in here. And the other piece is over here, which I believe was R&D office business type development over here.
Just a historic perspective here, when the plan was put together and what we had for the plan here, it was like a planned unit development, and there was a residential component on the east side, and at the end of Audubon Parkway, that was almost like a small village center with a commercial component and higher density residential. Since then, the plan has morphed to something very, very different. So you have these various development pods, which are, again, different, some of which are different than the original concept when the comprehensive plan was being formulated.
So let me ask you a question. If basically now it doesn't involve any commercial, the new plan, right? Why do we have to consider it?
Good question. Well,
Because it was pink, and you have to either decide to throw it out and put it in a special designation, or we have to move it to another designation.
Right now, it's considered, it's categorized as a mixed-use activity center, and the mixed-use activity centers and commercial retail are the two uses on the current plan that we've been under consideration for adjustment. So this is more about how we designate these now, because we can't really keep them the way they are. They're a mixed-use activity center, and that's kind of going away.
Well, since we don't know really what it's going to be going forward, I don't think we have a choice but to make it a special district. I mean, we can't see that far into the future. We don't know what the developer's going to do at this point. To do anything besides make it a special district would be almost counterproductive, unless somebody disagrees.
The only thing that's certain right now is the residential component on the east side, that they're in with a plan to subdivide it right now.
Does anybody disagree with making it a special district?
No, I mean, the original pink designation here, unfortunately, I have a little bit of history with this property, but, was done when it was a completely different vision of what this property could be, and it's just not relevant any longer. I'm not with the developer any further, but I know it's not relevant any longer. So, yes, I think that's fine.
I think there's a consensus, Lee, for special district.
Great, thanks, that's all I needed.
with the description, right?
With the description, right.
And Dan, back to you on the rest of the plant piece. I'm sorry, I only left you a few minutes. Am I allowed to duck out, or did you want me to listen in on the next piece as well?
Well, let me say this. The next piece is this. These are the specific changes to the text of Chapter 3 that would result from the changes that we've discussed over the last several months. This is, in a lot of ways, this is wordsmithing. So are we all up for some wordsmithing now? Okay. I can run through these, or we could see whether people have any specific issues with what they're seeing, and any questions. You want to do that? You don't want to listen to me? All right. Okay, Gary.
We could tell what you're suggesting to be deleted, to be added.
Yes, you can.
We just went through.
Okay, Gary. So
On page 3.5.
you need the microphone.
Page 3.5, back page. 3.4, the bottom bullet is improve regulations to encourage mixed use, and then there's 3 paragraphs underneath that. The third reads, establish new use zoning districts and provisions to facilitate types of development identified in the conceptual land use text. I just wanted to make sure this is the part of the plan calling for the new districts we've been talking about all this time, not setting out the ability for someone in the future to ask for a rezone. I wanted to confirm.
That's the intent, I don't know.
That's the intent.
All right.
Anybody got anything else on 3.5? Does anybody have anything before 3.5? Okay, anybody else on 3.5? Okay, keep going, next. Anybody got anything?
Anybody got anything at all?
On 3.8, there's a comment. Seems like this section should be revised to include the discussions of the new forms and types. Why would it go there if it's in 3.2.2?
It's not, it's gonna go in 3.2.2. So, it'll get pushed to 3.2.2.
Are you referring to the numbers at the bottom of the page, or the numbers that you see the paragraphs here? I'm not sure.
The numbers that are down here.
The page numbers are down here.
But I think Gary was referring to the policy numbers right there.
I used both. I used the page number, and then on page 3-8, there's a comment. And I just thought that the answer to that comment is not necessary to put that discussion here, because the new 3.2.2, the document we've been talking about on that.
Hey, Lee, are you still on?
Yeah, I think you want that.
You drop out?
No, actually, I'm still here.
All right, are you looking at this? Because I have a question about this, actually. We're on page 3-8, and it talks about employing design standards to enhance the community appearance and sense of place. And what we have here is a list of areas that the plan seeks to guide in terms of design. So we'll talk a little about landscaping and screening, building design, scale, those kinds of things. Is this a place where do we need to add anything in here related to the form and type, or can we just rely on the new section that we prepared to pick that up here? And I think the sense is that we can defer to the new section and leave this the way it is.
I think that the only thing, if we were to bring one element into this, would be the concept of transitions. But other than that, I think this set is fine. So if we were to add anything, it would just be a bullet for transition. And they are covered again further on, but they could be touched on with this set because they're a physical architectural or landscape architectural thing.
The idea here is to provide some guidance to folks, to look at these specific elements as they design their projects. these are areas of special interest and emphasis to the town. So if we wanted to add transition in here, we could add a bullet in here that deals with transition.
It only makes sense.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense to put it in.
Okay.
So, all right, we'll try and craft something there for transition.
Okay.
We'll work on that. Page 3-9.
Excuse me, Dan. Just a question on section 3.5, where it references a sense of place. Is that a defined concept anywhere?
So I gotta figure out where
You're on
what
page
page are you on now with sense of place?
3.8, where that comment was?
I got the general bullet, I'm trying to find the specific, if you notice, 3-5, each one of these bullets are described in the text in more detail. I'm trying to figure out where that is. Sense of place, what page is it? Is it on the first page?
Yeah, 3-5, it's the place at the end, it's just the bold type. That's what it's talking about.
Yeah, okay, all right, so there's nothing specific about that, so ask your question again.
That refers in urban planning language, a certain concept that I think we might want to define
Okay,
somewhere in this document.
a little broad. Okay, all right. Is that something we can put together, Lee, for that? Just kind of define what sense of place means here, the suggestion?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I think so.
Can't see any. Sorry.
Like that?
No, well, no. Trust me. Okay, anything else on 3.8? Okay, I'm gonna go to 3.9. So, there is a question here about the placement of buildings, and this discussion has taken place in the committee several times. I think most notably Brian Culpa had some questions about this, and it really is whether or not we should talk about the placement of buildings along other than traditional corridors, taking a more traditional form, if that makes sense. So would we employ traditional locations for buildings on suburban corridors in order to try and move them away from the back where they are adjacent to residential, to move the parking around to the side and the rear? I think that's what Brian had suggested a couple times, and the question is whether or not we would entertain that here or not. So I'll just toss that out.
I like the idea of having a discussion about it. I mean, what I can envision right now is Bailey,
Sorry.
Sheridan.
Right.
Bailey and Sheridan, where we have the new Henderson buildings, they define the edge. But it's not traditional in the sense that we normally think of traditional, but it helps define the edge of that parcel. I particularly like it. They're close to the intersection, but it's not a traditional form. So I like to have the discussion, or at least try to find a home for it.
So that particular issue is a whole difference between traditional and suburban form. And so I do think that we're headed toward setting zoning rules that set the parameters for building placement. And if we're comfortable bringing some of those up from the zoning to here, perhaps generalizing them some, we could certainly do that.
What do you think, folks?
Better to have more information in here.
Yeah. Okay, it seems like generally folks are in favor of that, so I guess we'll work that a little bit too. Okay. All right, 3.9, 3.10. I don't know what the next. Anything? 3.18 is when things pick up again. It's proposed that a lot of these would come out because they're being dealt with in the newer sections. Anybody have a problem with that?
There is, at the end of the proposed 322, there is the two paragraphs about future rezonings for expansion and new business. Could that be referenced in this last bullet that's being added? The last bullet on page 3-26.
No, okay. Okay,
Oh, I thought
I'm on
you were-
318.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I would, we're wishful thinking. All right, we're moving along here. Nothing on 318. What's the next comment anybody has? Everybody generally, okay with what's here? The map itself, figure 6, there were some changes to that, obviously. Anybody have any comments on the way this looks? The changes that were made, essentially we dropped out the commercial retail category, it's now commercial mixed use, with a caveat that, folks need to refer to map 6-A, which will be the map that, Kim's map as it's known, to get more specific information about those areas. And then we did introduce a new category called special use center, which we identified a couple places to fall into that category tonight. The only other one that we didn't talk about is the Millard Fillmore area, which would stand as it has, as a medically related area. So moving right along. Anybody, next comment? Just fire them up. Gary, who you got?
Well, on page 326, there's an added bullet. Top, designation of additional commercial zoning districts should be limited. The form and type of development proposed for new districts should be consistent with the designations discussed in 3.3.2. There was language in 3.3.2 on the last page. I was just wondering if it should be repeated here, just expand this bullet. This says additional commercial zoning districts should be limited. We also talk about expansion of existing centers. Should that be added to page 3-26?
Maybe it should all be moved up there.
Well, it's very clear in what's proposed in 3.3.2, the new language. I was just, if we could refer to it or reference it or repeat it in a different way, someplace else in the plan. Thank you.
Lee, is that something we can work that out?
Probably. I'm not happy duplicating it, but I'm confident we could work up some similar language that we could use in an alternate location.
You understand? Okay. Anything else here? We need to modify the table, obviously, to reflect the new categories. So 3-32 is where we had the former description of the commercial and mixed-use areas, industrial uses. You can see that most of this will come out, including the discussion of scale of centers that we used previously to try and guide that development. So this would come out, this entire section would come out and would be replaced by the section that we talked about a few moments ago. So, everybody good?
Just a global question. Carl and I were talking about this earlier, so we're used to, commercial to us is pretty comprehensive. It includes, retail, office space, a lot of different things. So, in the context of what we're talking about here, I guess commercial's been limited to meaning retail, is that correct?
It's no longer called out as retail.
Because office, we're not discussing.
We're not discussing.
Kind of over there, industrial's
Right.
over there. So commercial means retail? Is that what, is this the new
No, I think
definition?
actually what it means is it's mixed use.
Okay,
But
so,
office is going to be handled differently.
but I can do office in commercial, right?
I think.
I can do attorney's offices, a professional
Yeah,
office
yeah,
space, and...
Yeah, I think that's,
Yes, you'll allow office in commercial, you may not allow it on the ground floor in certain locations, but yes, you would allow office in. It's just that office would be anticipated to be sprinkled in with other things, either horizontally or vertically.
So are you distinguishing between corporate office space, professional office space, which is kind of retail? So if I got, Scott Trade or one of the other guys that really is almost a retail space is professional office space, distinctive from, say, corporate office space, how am I mean, in our world, in the demand we get, some of that professional office space is just the same as retail does.
I was going to...
Yeah, I think that maybe the better descriptor, instead of, kind of commercial or corporate, is really park or, mixed-use center. So, if you're in a park setting, like the larger pieces where Geico is, where all those other things are, if you're those large pieces like that, that is a different thing, at least so far.
Let me respond to what I hear you saying. We're going to be addressing this issue moving forward, but I would anticipate that smaller scale offices would be permitted use in some of these commercial districts. So we're talking about corporate parks, that they're being handled basically, hopefully a different study that's coming up.
Okay. Where do you, Carl?
I just had, is it working? I just had one kind of global comment too, and we jumped so quick to 3.5. My only comment on 3.3 right in the beginning is under A, where you're talking about development patterns. It says, like, fourth line down, the plan is a tool to distribute densities. And it just gets very sort of vague to me. I mean, I think what we're trying to do is really target investment. And so when we...
Kelly, what page are you on?
I'm sorry, this is the very first page. We referenced this piece for NYSERDA in the beginning, but I think it's important, and I don't know where this necessarily sits in with the plan of, like, why are we really doing this, and how... I mean, is the market analysis going to be referenced any here to, like, really understand, like, there are parts of the town that are struggling and will continue to struggle even more so in the future with just changing preferences and desire of future home buyers and shoppers, and you're really trying to do this to capture that and position Amherst in the best possible place going forward. And So I guess I'm just...
Where does that go?
I think that's very important as you're communicating this, and to have it someplace in the document so it lives on and people are reminded about it, and it's not just said at sort of the presentation meeting, but that it lives on someplace to remind people, or I'm not sure if, like, the market analysis is bolted in some way, but I think that's a very strong piece of work that's been done that really reinforces everything we're talking about.
I think where we would put that, I guess. So let's capture that note, Amy, and we'll think a little bit about where that goes. The setting for making these changes probably could be incorporated in here somewhere. What else? Where are we here? Gary? What do you got?
You have a question on page 334. I don't know if anyone has anything before that.
Yep.
paragraph, and it's the paragraph, the last paragraph above commercial office. I don't have an answer for that, but it seems like it's an important question because this paragraph captures a lot of what we've been talking about. Does it stay, or is it being replaced by all the other work we've done, or is it now sort of out of context?
I guess that's a question for you guys to consider.
If we deleted this paragraph, what would be lost? So much of it is being replaced elsewhere.
I'm not sure that there's much lost. You have to go to the paragraph previous to that, really, to understand what this is about. So let's start with the paragraph above it. The paragraph above was incorporated into the comprehensive plan because we wanted some guidance for auto-related and motor service uses in the plan. We didn't just want them plunked down anywhere. So we tried to specify where those were preferred in the planning piece. So the first question is, do we keep that paragraph, and do we need something that speaks to that particular kind of use? Because we thought we needed it before. I don't think that need has gone away. Given what we've done so far, and we've been dealing with form and type more than anything else, I haven't dealt a lot with use, but this is one of those uses that required some special attention before. So the first question is does this still kind of address that issue, provide the guidance that we'd like to have for those kinds of uses, gas stations, muffler stores, those kinds of things. So do we need this? Do we still need it? I guess that's the first question. And then I think the second paragraph kind of alludes to those kinds of uses and their location along these major corridors.
Does it also allude to relationships, though, with the producer outlet?
In part, yes. So the question, is there anything that we've done that would negate the need for these two paragraphs? I think that's the question, really. If everybody's comfortable with keeping them in, and is it specific enough? Is there anything we've done that you would say might change the way it's described? I'm not saying there is or there isn't. I'm just trying to see whether folks have any thoughts on it. Just keep it the way it is.
I'd just like to note that gas stations may be obsolete in 20 years. Plan.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is we keep them in the way they are at this point. Okay, all right. All right, Gary. What else you got? Or anyone else for that matter? Okay, the areas that we just talked about, those special activity centers, the couple that we discussed, the gray areas, as Dan calls them, there will be some description for those added to this section on page 36, I think. Yeah, 36. We'll add a description of those centers in here. And by the same token, we're taking it out for several of the smaller centers that were previously described. Anybody got any thoughts on those? Okay with that?
Basically taking out the ones we've been talking about.
Exactly. There's a couple, like Swarmville and Gettsville, I think that Lee would recommend that we keep in. So they remain there. They would be augmented with the ones that we talked about earlier this evening. So. Well, I'm on page page 46. Is there anything else before, does anybody have any other comments on the text? Alan, did you have anything? I didn't mean to skip over it. Okay. So, hearing none, I think, Amy, you got a good sense of what we need to do to this. All right, so we need to make some changes to that. Okay, let's just talk for a moment, if you would indulge me for a couple more minutes. Talk about what we're doing and where we're going here. Can you bring that calendar up, please? I don't know what's next on the agenda. I lost my agenda here. Is there anything are we missing anything here? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the schedule, if we can, for a moment. In the last meeting, we talked about schedule. We threw some dates out there on an assumption that we wanted to work this thing through the summer and get out into the fall, and then hopefully have the plan amendments ready to go in the fall, and the code would follow thereafter. There's been some desire on the part of some folks to accelerate that schedule to the point where they would like to have an opportunity to have the planning board and the town board act on these changes during this calendar year. So what does that mean? That means we've got to start pushing the schedule a little bit more aggressively, a lot more aggressively, actually. If you consider what needs to be done, the comprehensive plan amendment, which is the piece we've just been talking about, needs to go through some public review. It needs to come back to this committee, based on those comments, it made adjustment to, and then advance to the planning board for their consideration and recommendation to the town board. And in the interim, Lee and Code Studio will be working on draft code language and an overall assessment of the code to identify other areas that need to be addressed with changes that they would recommend as they go through the assessment. So the drafting of the code, the assessment of the code would take place probably once we finish this, let's just say in the June, July, August time frame, to the point where these plan amendments, if we're comfortable with these, and we advance these to the planning board, these could be considered by the planning board at their meeting in June or August, and the zoning code would follow soon thereafter for your consideration, in a time frame that would go somewhere between June, July, August, September, October, for this committee to do its work, recommend the code changes to the planning board, and the planning board takes it and then works their recommendation to the town board, all of which results in an opportunity for the town board to consider the plan amendments and the code amendments before the end of the year. I'm not going to go through this calendar specifically, but that's a general outline. What that does is it means that we probably need to meet more frequently, and it means we need to have some public engagement, public information meetings pretty quick, and probably accelerate that through the process as we go from one step to the other. On top of all of this is the need for us to comply with the State Environmental Quality Review Act and do the seeker work that needs to take place in order to position the town board to make decisions on what is the plan amendment and the code amendments. I will remind you that code amendments mean map amendments. So somewhere along the line, you're going to get a map that says this is what we consider to be the proposed zoning for these areas, and text of the code that goes with it. And you'll have to work through that. That is going to be pretty detailed work, I think. So just be prepared for that. Kim has a list of dates on here. I'm just going to walk through those for the committee. We've been trying to do technical committee meetings and working committee meetings, trying to preserve the ability of the technical committee to advise the working committee along the way. You all have been meeting together fairly frequently over the last several months. So unless there's some special need for that, and there may be along the way, we'll probably continue to meet jointly to be able to move this stuff forward. So, and we'll kind of identify those along the way. So the first thing I need to make you aware of is that we have scheduled some public information meetings for next week and the week after, Transit Middle School and Amherst Middle School. Now, this presumes that you take the action tonight to release this information to the community. If you decide that you want to see the changes that we've talked about, and you'd be more comfortable with that before you release it to the public, then I need to know that. And we need to kind of work toward that, and we'll have to figure that out as we go along. Again, this schedule was put together based on a time frame, a deadline, not necessarily the work of this committee. So, and I don't mean to imply that that's not important, just so you know that. So we would have a couple meetings in the next couple of weeks. The next meeting of this group would be May 25th, where we would ask you to take the proposed amendments and endorse those, accept those as a committee for consideration by the planning board at their meeting in June, and perhaps the second meeting in June, and then August. They do not meet in July, so they would have a month or so to go over it. The good thing about that, I guess, is it gives us some additional time to do some information work for the planning board prior to their meetings between June and August. So there is time to take that out and get folks better acquainted. But it would mean you folks have endorsed this and moved it on to the planning board relatively quickly. So that's kind of the near term as we see it. Let's see. So May 25th, we're talking about June 14th or 21st as potential meetings to begin to discuss the code. So we expect Lee will provide that code. I will tell you that in the first week of July, 5, 6, 7, in that time frame, it hasn't been fixed yet. He will be in town to talk about the code with staff, and we'll probably take the opportunity while he's in town to try and get folks together, if they're available, to talk with him about what he sees in the code and some of the other issues that may have come up between now and then. Which ones?
You said when we would be meeting with Lee.
Yeah, I believe it's, right now, it's 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, so if it was an evening meeting, it'd be 5 or 6.
Right. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Okay. Yeah, we had this problem last month with the transit-oriented development thing too. So, okay, so I'll help you out here, Ellen, in a minute. We have a meeting scheduled for July 12th, and these dates we'll mail out to you. A meeting of the technical committee on July 12th. So this is where the technical committee might meet separately to talk about the code itself, just to make sure that the technical folks that work with the code on a regular basis get a chance to look at it and clean it up before it comes to the working committee. And the working committee would meet on the 26th of July to begin to look at the code and the framework for the code. We'll look for some public input meetings in early August, 3rd or the 10th. On the 23rd, we would meet again as a joint in a joint committee meeting. The idea here would be that you would accept the zoning framework and the code work that Code Studio has put together, and then on the 13th or the 20th of September, you would have had the draft zoning map to look at and endorse that. After that, if you've endorsed those products, they would go on to the planning board, and conceptually the charge of the committee as a reviewing agency of these products would likely conclude. That does not mean, however, that we will not ask you to help us as we go through the process with public information, public engagement activities to help the community better understand what proposing to do. So, that's the schedule as we see it now. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I just want to alert you to May 17th, and possible schedule conflict there. Another net zero project, the town board has endorsed is the Clean Energy Communities Project. And one of the first steps of that is solar on Amherst campaign, which is going to offer homeowners and businesses greatly reduced prices for installed solar panels or some designated installers. So that's going to be on the 17th and the 20th of this month.
Okay.
First at Barnum Road, the second at Bridgewood. If anyone wants to pencil on it, I'll have to do that.
Okay.
It's not a big deal, I just wanted to
Nope,
let you know
I
there
appreciate
will
it.
be some publicity trying to bring people out to that.
And honestly, we have limited opportunity to try and avoid other, as we know about them, to avoid other events. But it's good to know about those, and we'll see what we can do about accommodating some of that. Any other thoughts? Anybody? It's pretty aggressive. I realize it requires meetings in a more condensed fashion. We appreciate your patience thus far, and we hope that we can work through this and meet our objectives here. So if there's no more questions about the schedule, I'm going to...
Well, the first question, are we ready to release the information to the public at this point? Because we have these public input meetings coming up, starting next week. We're ready to release? Everybody in agreement? Okay, all right. So, right. Yeah, with the corrections that we discussed this evening. Yeah. Okay, so we're ready to release. The second comment is that I think it's important for some of us, and I realize it's difficult for all of us, but to attend these public input meetings. I mean, I want to be a fly in the wall because I want to hear what the public has to say. So if you can get out to either one of these meetings, or if you feel inclined to do both of them, it would be beneficial. We're going to get reports back, I'm sure, but it would be nice to hear the comments ourselves. So if you can do that, that would be really great. Other than that, it is very aggressive, but in the meantime, people that have asked us to move it up are trying to help us, not hinder us. So take that for what it's worth. Okay. Yeah, it's going to come out to you. Yep.
I was waiting for the pushback. Hearing none. You didn't hear. No, I didn't.
So, it's also, we discussed this prior. I mean, this is everything goes okay. If in fact we approve everything and it goes, for instance, to the planning board has problems with it, and it gets kicked back for something, everything could change. Same thing, even if the planning board approves it and it goes to the town board, and the town board kicks it back for some reason, something else could change too. So nothing's in stone at this point. Okay, any questions?
Lee, are you still on?
Yes, I am. And no, Dal, I don't have any questions.
That was actually Dan, but that's okay. Thanks, Lee. Okay, we're running over. Let's get to the public comment part. We have one person from the public here. Would you like to make any comments? What?
I guess I can take it from one, but I like the protections that I was hearing about keeping 10. I like the protections about nonconformity and not having 10-story buildings in Amherst. That's not in Amherst. A lot of us moved here to live in, so I would appreciate those protections built in. And I appreciated everyone's comments about that too, because I think that would be, a developer would see that who may not live in Amherst and wouldn't care about the quality of life. And they would, be able to expand to the space provided for that. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, did you sign in? What is your name? Ellen Schiff.
Okay, any comments? Anybody else got anything to say? If not, we're adjourned for the evening.